So I'm going to, I can share my screen, right? Because I do have a slide presentation that I'll want to do. And so this slide presentation, I'm calling it, well, I have the title card, but before I go, put it on. It's called Transformational Economics from a Post-Scarcity to an Abundant Society. I think that's what I'm calling it. And Julia read all that, direct democracy and all that. And I could talk on many different directions, but I want to focus on the economic aspect. And in my talk, in my presentation, I'll cover the subjects of climate change, the financialized economy and how much the banks really run everything, and how we can change things and create a society, an economy, an environment, everything that works for all, an abundant society. So that's where I'll be going. And I think it's about half an hour. I think that's what I was told I have about. Is that right? And then we'll go into
We're
questions.
we're flexible. It's not like we're gonna, pull out the cane if you go
Okay.
over.
You can't, you could throw virtual tomatoes at me. Okay, so let me hit share screen and see that I can find my keynote. There it is. Okay. And let's see. I think yeah, let's see if I can go to full screen. Let's see what that looks like. Oh, thought I could well, I'll just do it like this instead of the whole screen. Um, anyway, so as I said, transformative economics from a post-scarcity to an abundant society. There's a couple of slides that are very wordy. There's a lot. There's a lot I want to tell you, and it may be a lot for a short time to wrap your mind around, especially when I'm talking about the banking industry. And it'll be a little mind blowing at first. And so, as Julie mentioned, this is my latest book, Toward a More Perfect Union from Scarcity to Abundance from All. So a lot of what I'm talking about will come from this book. Okay, so um, I said that I'd talk about banks. Bankers are the inevitable American aristocrats, the US president said that. This US president was actually the eighth president of the United States, Martin Van Buren, for any of you who know your history. He said this in about 1837. So that's going back a few years. And the lower caption reads a quote from Thomas Jefferson, who said, I sincerely believe with you that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies." Um, this will tie in with climate change and everything as we go on. So another American president, Teddy Roosevelt, once said, there can be no real political democracy unless there's democracy. We talk about in the US and around the world, especially in developed countries, we're seeing the threats to democracy. And there's two aspects of democracy: political democracy, which gets most of the spotlight, but there's also economic democracy, equality for all. And we live in an age now of economic non-democracy. We call it the neoliberal age, neoliberalism, and it's defined simply as letting the free markets reign and profits before everything else. And this leads to many of the crises we have, all the crises: wealth inequality, income inequality, massive student debt, for-profit healthcare system, climate change, racial disparities, and ultimately it leads to a lot of society because it's for a lot of people, it's a lot of insecurity to deal with. And we can pretty much summarize um, the age of neoliberalism by this famous quote from the movie Wall Street: greed is good. And that's pretty much it. Hey, it's all about the money. So speaking of greed is good, right now, you're probably aware in Dubai, going on for a couple more days, is COP28, um, chaired by a man by the name of Sultan Al Jaber, um, a, a who is the head of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. So this is classic fox guarding the hen house when you have the head of the nation of Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates oil company running the summit. And as this headline from the New York Times stated, it's big oil versus science at the UN climate summit. There are many, many oil executives there, fossil fuel companies there, making sure they're not forgotten. And Sultan Al Jaber uh, a few days ago created quite an uproar when he said there was no science to support a phase out of oil and gas. This is one of the major conversations, a phase out by 2050, 40, the line in the sand keeps moving. But as he said, he had a backpedal from it. It was on a panel where he said, no science to support this phase out. So where his interests are. And another headline that came out of, ripped out of the newspapers, was about how do we find cash for the climate, the needs, especially from the nations that are being affected by climate change the most. So it's this. Like, I took a couple of excerpts from this article. The first one saying when there's a global crisis, wealthy nations tend to find money. In the U.S. during the coronavirus, money was found, no problem, and for military aid to Ukraine, now Israel. But the global crisis, it's complicated. And this happens every one of these COPs. And that's why famously Greta Thunberg, a few years ago, when she was talking about her critique of COP, she said it's just a lot of blah, 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 because they're talking about what we need to do and the money that's going to be needed. But question is, as always, will it fare better than earlier climate talks at shoring up anything close to the money that's needed? Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, was there last Saturday at the climate summit in Dubai, and she said the United States will promise $3 billion for the Green Climate Fund, but the I don't know if Kamala Harris, but administration officials are already acknowledging it will be a struggle to persuade Congress to approve the money because in the United States Congress, there's a number of climate change deniers. And then this last excerpt is really the key where I'm going on from here. This is a quote from the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley. She said, "The world needs long-term money. We give thanks to the progress made, but it does nothing but assuage consciences. And choosing between people and the planet is a false choice. The world has enough funds." So what she's saying is different from what other nations are saying. Oh, developed nations, United States and others, we don't know if we have enough money, but the world has enough funds. And this is where I'm going to go for the next number of slides to help you understand this. So let's go back in time 2 years, COP26 in Glasgow. This headline from the New York Times, a little more than 2 years ago, November 25th, 2021. The headline was that bankers took over the climate change summit. That's bad for democracy. It wasn't just bad for democracy that the bankers took over the climate change summit. It's just bad for democracy in general that bankers just run democracy. I can't even say run democracy, dictate. So I want to delve into this. This is going to be a slide, very densely worded, but I hope you can follow along here. What happened at the and this is information from that article about the bankers at COP26. At the COP26 climate summit, what happened was an alliance from the financial industry was formed. They called themselves the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. They were made up of 450 international financial institutions, and they claim to have, if you're ready to hear that number, $130 trillion at their disposal. And that amount of money is more than the GDP of the world. 130 trillion at their disposal. And what they will do with this money, In PR speak, they'll drive upward convergence around corporate and financial institution net zero transition plans. I didn't make that up. That was a quote right from the article, if you can figure out what that means. But basically, it means they'll make money with their money and look good doing it. They can say, look what we're doing. It's called greenwashing. And this alliance won't be, they said they won't be dispersing the funds on climate projects. It will direct how those funds are invested, favoring behaviors the financial industry deems virtuous and freezing out those it doesn't. So this is why he was saying bad for democracy, bad for climate change. This is really just a joke, but the amount of money they have it's really surreal. It's just another stratosphere. So where does this banking alliance come up with the $130 trillion that they've conjured up? Well, Sherlock Holmes used to say elementary, my dear Watson. So it is very elementary. And this is the key to it all. They just print it up. Maybe some of you are aware the whole where money comes from, but money, 97% of the money in circulation is printed by banks out of thin air. It's just they just do it. So now the next slide, a little wordy as I explain this whole mechanism, the casino capitalism. So the 10 largest banks in the U.S. have 15 largest banks in the U.S. have $15 trillion in reserves, which is pales in comparison to the 10 largest banks in the world that have $35 trillion. So from that, just the U.S. banks, from that 15 trillion, they can do what's known as fractional reserve. It allows banks to create money at a magnitude of 10 times the amount they have in reserve. So if they have the 15 largest banks have $15 trillion, they can create 15 times 10, 150 trillion out of thin air. And that's just US banks. 10 largest banks in the world have 35 trillion. They can create 350 trillion. So this 130 is, peanuts. And they make loans with the money they create, but where they loan that money is up to them. And they mainly lend it to hedge funds, private equity firms that gamble the money all around the world in global derivatives markets. The banks gamble too. And that's why our current economic system is called, casino capitalism. It has other names too. Someone yesterday that I was interviewing used the term Wizard of Oz capitalism because nobody realizes who's the person behind the curtain. So the famed economist John Kenneth Galbraith once said, the process by which banks create money is so simple that the mind is repelled. I imagine with, World System Solution talking about the systems, what could be done. I don't know if you talk about money or what, but just the amount of money that could be created is just, as John Kenneth Galbraith says, it's so simple, the mind is repelled. So this next slide is also somewhat dense and wordy, and it might be a little bit to wrap your mind around, but I want to take a deep dive into how Wall Street works. If anyone saw the movie The Big Short or read the book, Michael Lewis, well, his book and the author of The Big Short and then the movie delved into gave a peek into the financialization leading up to the 2008 financial crash, and Wall Street got smart from that. So I'll go here. So when I say Wall Street, I mean the largest banks and exchanges the world has ever seen. These banks and exchanges are sitting on the greatest piles of money the world has ever seen. Like I said, the 15 largest banks in the world in the US have 15 trillion, creating 150 trillion. It's just mind-boggling. The banks take the money, they create derivatives that they buy and sell all over the world. That's what was happening in the financial crash and The Big Short. They were creating these derivatives with mortgages in them. And the derivatives are designed by the quants, the quantitative analysts who work for the banks, people with PhD in math and physics in such a way that they never lose money. Now, it used to be commodities that the main aspect of the derivatives that the banks were buying and selling. So like mortgages were part of the derivatives. But then after the financial crash, when the commodities were mortgages and the housing market collapsed, the derivatives too, all the big banks went down, but they were bailed out. That's another story. The crash made the banks smarter, and after getting massively bailed out, now the derivatives, the quants got to work and created much more abstract derivatives as opposed to containing concrete commodities like mortgages or food. Now they're mostly containers of money trading at a dollar volume, $4 to $5 trillion a day in indexes in central play trading platforms all over the world. So that's where if you ever see like video clips or photos of the analysts at banks or quants, they have many monitors and they're all following different numbers and patterns and graphs. It's just they're watching the trading platforms all over the world. And these derivatives are based on interest rates and exchange rates of currency all around the world. It's just macabre, this game. And then part two of this deep dive, one popular derivative of interest and exchange rates is a volatility index called the VIX, which is known as the fear index. It's a square root of an index of theoretical expectations of volatility based on all the options taken on the S&P 500. And there's even a double daily double VIX, and inverse VIX. This is just, you may not even know what this is. Do you even understand it? I can't tell you I do for sure. I've just done the research, read about this. But don't worry, because the only ones who do are the quants, the PhDs in math and physics, sometimes chemistry too. Their employers, the large banks, don't worry about understanding it, because all that matters to them, how much money is pouring in and how much money they're accruing. And then once they're making all that money, it goes off into offshore tax havens, into the realm of what is called the secrecy world. We've got a peek into it over the last, I don't know, it's 10 years, 5 years, 8 years, 3 different pieces of information came out thanks to this, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Some of these they were plastered over the newspapers, the Panama Papers, the Pandora Papers, and then something called the FinCEN files, the Financial Crimes Unit of the U.S. Treasury. And it was just the tip of the iceberg of what is known of the secrecy world. And what it's understood is that hundreds of trillions, if not quadrillions of dollars that circulate in the offshore tax havens of secret world, money that's laundered all around the world, hidden from view. Some of it comes from, because the money gets funneled to oligarchs, to kleptocrats, and it just goes into a whole trail. And the Wall Street banks are where the laundered money originates from, having been garnered from the abstract derivatives of currency traded from all over the world as part of a system so rigged that the house never loses. Nice gig if you can get it. So that's why the person used the term Wizard of Oz capitalism, because behind the curtain is a banker. Could be Jamie Dimon, the head of the largest bank in the U.S., JP Chase Morgan. Now, this is something most people don't know, is that the largest tax haven in the world is the United States. And in the United States, there's a race to the bottom with various states. Delaware started it. They're the well-known corporate headquarters of money laundering. But then other states got involved: South Dakota, Wyoming, Nevada, many states. And they just make it very easy for money to be hidden all over the place. And the money just, nobody knows what's there. These LLCs and that just are piled on top of pile in secrecy. So there's a lot of implications in this this stratosphere of wealth, because money stored in these tax havens can become, and not even can become, becomes dark money. The dark money gets piled into equity funds, private equity, and the money that goes to politicians. And that's why dark money is destroying democracy. Perhaps some of you know the book Dark Money by Jane Mayer, the investigative journalist who wrote it. Came out in, I think, 2016 or 17. It was really a landmark book. She really did a lot of work in understanding this. And just even then, it's a tip of the iceberg of the amount of money going. I mean, some of you know about like the Koch brothers or the Koch network of right-wing billionaires who've put a lot of dark money into political campaigns or just political sponsorship, paying politicians. The Supreme Court the makeup of the Supreme Court now is a result of dark money and the Federalist Society, and the man who was behind the Federalist Society, a man named Leonardo Leo, now has a multi-billion-dollar jackpot that he's no longer involved with the Federalist Society, but he wants to do for the US what he did for the Federalist Society, use that dark money to influence. But dark money is not only destroying democracy, it's also destroying the planet, because that money goes into the coffers of the politicians who are the climate change deniers and will say climate change is a hoax or just denied in general. And it'll also find its way to the fossil fuel companies for them to have as much money as they want. So it's really, if it can feel like really overwhelming to know this and hear it, but it's also knowledge is power to be able to understand this. So that's why my presentation is really about systemic at the systemic change or the system underlying all this. But I will get into the positive aspect too. I'm not just want to bum everyone out here. But there's so this is the universe in which a certain percent, not the 1%, 0.01% or whatever, but it's a universe in which there's an infinite amount of money. It's a universe of abundance that the financial sector resides in, one in which money is limitless. So that's why I was talking about a post-scarcity society that becomes an abundance society. It's abundance for a certain segment of society, for a certain sliver of society. Then I didn't touch on the Federal Reserve, but they're also the central bank of the United States, and every country has a central bank. And then there's the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland. That's the central bank of all central banks. But the Federal Reserve underlies all the banks in the United States. The Federal Reserve also lives by the limitless rules of infinity, by what is called QE infinity, which stands for quantitative easing infinity. QE infinity means there's no limit to how much the Federal Reserve can create. Now, Federal Reserve doesn't even need reserves like banks do, fractional reserves. So if they have whatever reserve they have, 10 times the amount is what they create. Federal Reserve just creates money out of thin air, basically. As Ben Bernanke, the former chair of the Federal Reserve, said, we just press a couple of keys on the keyboard. So essentially, they give that money they create to banks. And from 2007 to 10, they dished out about 29 trillion to banks. And then from 2019 to the present, before the pandemic, Federal Reserve gave out at least 20 trillion to banks. That's at least what is known. So a couple notes here. The Federal Reserve requires no congressional approval for their actions, so they're free to do as they please. By charter, they are supposed to be independent of any political bodies, because they're supposed to make their decisions independently, not political decisions. And a second note, the Federal Reserve is privately owned. Its shareholders are private banks. So the fox is guarding the fox. The fox isn't even guarding the henhouse, as the Sultan Al Jaber at the COP28 is protecting the oil companies. So Henry Ford had a famous quote that he said, "It's well enough that people of the nation don't understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there'd be a revolution before tomorrow morning." This it's best kept in polite company, and we don't talk about this, but this is some serious stuff. And with so much money floating around the wealth class, that's why and how there's such wealth disparity in the United States. The 50 richest Americans with a worth of 2 trillion hold as much wealth as half the country, and the top 1% of Americans have a combined net worth of 34 trillion, while the poorest 50% hold just 2 trillion, or 0.9% of household wealth. So we see this problem in the United States. Elsewhere around the world, the United States is the worst of all the democracies in terms of the wealth inequality. And it shows up in how skewed political democracy is and how what the majority wants. The majority wants a clean environment. We want to do something about climate change, and so many of the social issues, abortion, and so many equality. The great majority want because that's just humane and common sense, but it doesn't happen because of this gap. And so there's abundance for the wealth class and scarcity for everyone else, along with the planet, especially the planet. But yeah, just greater population. And it shows up in these statistics. So as I said, the United States is worst faring of all the developed nations. The United States has the lowest life expectancy, second highest poverty rate, spends the most on healthcare, and has the worst health outcomes, has the highest child mortality rate, has a citizenry that spends the most on college, has the highest income inequality, has the lowest voter turnout in elections, and there's an organization that has something called the Social Progress Index, which every year they look at countries and how well they fare. And the most recent one, the United States ranked 28th. And the Social Progress Index uses 50 metrics to measure quality of life in countries around the world. Out of the 163 countries, only the United States, Hungary, and Brazil are the ones where people are worse off than when the index began in 2011, and declines in Brazil and Hungary are smaller than America. And Michael Porter, one of the people on the Social Progress Index, said the data point an alarming picture of the state of our nation. We hope it will be a call to action. It's like we're a developing country. So that's why, yeah, no progress on so many things, the issues, again, climate change and wealth inequality and so on. And scarcity shows up in the talk of austerity, like, oh, we just can't afford to do that. That's what happens in the United States. So we can't afford, just like I showed the slide earlier about COP28 and Kamala Harris saying, oh, $3 billion we can get pledged to the Green Climate Fund, but hard to say if Congress will give more. It's not that the money isn't there. It's just that it's just a mindset. I mean, talk about evolution of consciousness, and it's like de-evolution of consciousness when you think about we don't have it to save the world. One other statistic I thought very, talking about the healthcare systems, number of people in countries, various countries go bankrupt every year because of medical bills, unheard of in just about every country except the United States. It's the leading cause of bankruptcies in the United States. So, I think in summing up the segment on banking, I think we can say just banks are a hydra of corruption, and will we ever nationalize them? So it's I hope you've got a little feel for this now, but it doesn't have to be this way. So this is where I want to switch gears, segue into what can we do? How do we create a society that works for all? This is, a number of the progressive politicians, Bernie Sanders, Senators Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and other members of the Progressive Caucus in the United States Congress, and other leaders around the world. We've talked about America Green New Deal. Europe talks about the European New Deal, and they're closer to actually creating a European New Deal, and other parts of a social safety net in the United States, Medicare for all, college for all. This isn't a chart I put together, just a Green New Deal, but always it's kind of pejorative, this headline is that, and I found this, I think, on Google Images, but what Sanders' big plans cost. It's always, what's it going to cost? Total spending per year of 5 trillion, perhaps 1 trillion for the New Deal. Of course, it's all investments in it, and I have a slide a little bit that shows how well it pays off. But here's the thing: question always is, how are you going to pay for it? And that's part of that scarcity mentality and the austerity mentality. like Kamala Harris pledging again 3 trillion, but saying we don't 3 billion, but not knowing if Congress will allocate more because the conservatives, the fiscal hawks, so to speak, in Congress will say who control purse strings will say, well, how are you going to pay for it? Or we got to cut spending one here to make more money that way. But no one ever asked, remember the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, the people from COP26, the bankers who said we got $230 trillion. No one ever says, well, where are you getting all that from? How are you paying for that? So that is the wrong question. The question isn't how are you going to pay for it? The question is, what does our society need to create abundance for all? And once we envision what that is, once we see it, once we realize it, we can create what is needed. And that's really, envisioning a better world. The imagination, not even the imagination, just envisioning it. I mean, I think that's, the work of World System Solutions is working out pragmatic plans for a better world, a sustainable world. So there's an economist who's fairly well known now. Maybe some of you know her, Stephanie Kelton. She advocates for the economic idea of modern monetary theory. And she wrote a bestseller that came out a couple of years ago, The Deficit Myth. And she'll write op-eds in various newspapers, one from 2017, this one. She wrote, how we think about the deficit is mostly wrong, because it's not how are you going to pay for it, it's we do what we need to do and the money will be created. So this is a short video. This is from a few years back before the pandemic, where Stephanie Kelton just talks about her ideas. And it's not just her ideas. Okay.
You have to help people see the world as it could be relative to the way it is today. Look at our communities. The idea that there's not enough work that needs to be done, improving everything from preparing for a Green New Deal, shoring up our coastal regions, preparing for wildfires and floods and urban communities that are blighted, schoolyards that are, show people what we're tolerating today, and then fold the page over and show them what it could be.
So it's the classic on the house renovation shows, is the classic before and after.
That's exactly how I would do it.
That's how you'd pitch it.
I would do it exactly.
What does before look like at the moment? I think we know. I think we're good because we can see all the social problems out there. And also the fact that Wall Street has devoured Main Street in this country, from what I can see. What does the new vision look like? It's
a vision of people who are living in an economy that has broadly shared prosperity, where it's working for everyone and not just a handful of people at the very top. So in the richest country in the world, why do we have, millions of kids living in poverty? Why do we have people in elder care facilities lying in a bed in a dark room alone when we could have somebody sitting there holding their hand, playing checkers, reading to them? We can invest in so many ways in this economy. And I think it's just as simple as showing people the small changes that can have meaningful, impactful.
And is it that simple? Because when you talk about neoliberalism being the philosophy that drove Reagan right the way through till now, which has left us with this absolute train wreck of an economy, won't people say to you, well, okay, it's great, Stephanie, you show me a before and after, and yes, with these old people, there's a lot of cynicism around this. But I say, what's the philosophy here? What are we doing here? Why are we doing this? What's driving your economics? Because what happens very quickly is the socialism word. Oh, that's just socialism.
Yeah, no, I'm prepared to say that what we've done is collectively across the world, we have obsessed with budget outcomes. And that has been the driver of public policy. Where is the budget outcome? Is it in deficit? Is it in a big deficit? Is it in a little deficit? Can we put it in a smaller deficit? We have to reorient our focus and get back toward human outcomes. Those are the outcomes that matter. It isn't the budget outcome we should be obsessing over. It's, do we have a broadly balanced economy? And what does that look like? I'm done balancing the budget. Nobody needs to obsess about governments balancing their budgets. This is not a hallmark of success. The hallmark of success is, show me a balanced economy. Are people broadly sharing in the prosperity? Is all of the income and wealth going to people at the very top and everybody else is falling farther and farther behind? That is not a measure of success. And those policymakers should should not be championing their success in shrinking the budget deficit while they've wrecked their economies in the process. You're forcing your economy to balance the budget instead of using your budget.
Yeah. So it's totally totally the right way of thinking. So it's time to innovate a new society and world. All the organizations, World System Solutions, the organization I'm in, Evolutionary Leaders, and so many other people who are thinking, envisioning, and working towards creating a new society and world. Is it the end of capitalism? Is it something new, a future economy that transcends old boundaries? But we need to be excited, and I think I think the passion is what drives all of us to create this, and we don't think of it. Maybe we think of it perhaps as David versus Goliath, but it's good to be the underdog, and we know we're in the right. So really, what we're trying to create is a green economy. John Perkins uses the term life economy, and creating this life economy on paper is actually very simple. Here is the outline, 4 steps. You create a whether you nationalize banks or not, you create a national investment bank. China actually has a national investment bank. A national investment bank. The bank sells bonds. The Federal Reserve that can create money at will, any denomination, whatever they want. They could buy the bonds, and the National Bank Investment Bank can fund the Green New Deal, Medicare for all. They could cancel student debt, create free college, free universal daycare. I mean, the list goes on. What Stephanie Kelton is talking about, a prosperity for all, a broad-based economy. It's very simple. There's one state-run investment bank in the United States in North Dakota, the Bank of North Dakota. Megan, you're from South Dakota, I think. Yeah. So I don't know if you know about the Bank of North Dakota, but it's the profits, and it creates the Bank of North Dakota. It was created over 100 years ago, and it funds schools and all the necessary things for North Dakota, and any profits get redistributed back to the population. The other way of creating life economy is the federal government can deficit spend. The federal government can just say, well, this is what we want to do, and the Federal Reserve can buy the government's debts. The reason the Federal Reserve, for the most part, has been creating monetary policy or creating fiscal policy in the United States. The Congress is in charge of creating fiscal policy. Federal Reserve is in charge of creating monetary policy. The Congress is abdicating their responsibility to do anything real, good, true. They always talk about it's socialism to have a Green New Deal. When Green New Deal first got discussed, it was, oh, they want to stop airplanes and they want to do something about cows and burping cows or whatever. They just made a joke and Fox News went crazy with it. But this is how it works. The money is there, a national investment bank. So I talked about investing in this life economy, this green economy. The investment just pays off, multifold. A study came out that said world economy can reap 26 trillion in a decade by fighting climate change, the jobs that are created, the premature deaths that are ended, and just the wonders it does for the economy in general. It's not rocket science. Sultan Al Jaber is, that's why Sultan Al Jaber is heading COP28, because the writing's on the wall for the bad guys. Here's another interesting bit of information about how the Federal Reserve can create money. The minting the coin, the idea of the $1 trillion coin, it was raised again by some of the people in modern monetary theory, Stephanie Kelton and others, earlier this year, when the United States was possibly defaulting on their, talking about debt ceiling and not being able to reach it or raise it or what. But let me just want to talk to you about this. Maybe some of you have heard about this, minting a coin, $1 trillion coin. In the US Code, 5112, it says the Treasury Secretary may mint and issue proof platinum coins in accordance with such quantities and denominations as the Secretary, in the Secretary's discretion, may prescribe from time to time. So they could mint, U.S. Treasury could direct the U.S. Mint, to mint a coin in any denomination they want. They can just say, and it's not a coin that has $1 trillion worth of platinum in it. It's just, they can say this coin is worth $1 trillion. And minting the $1 trillion platinum coin, Treasury Secretary would be exercising authority which Congress has granted routinely for more than 220 years. The Secretary's authority is derived from an act of Congress. The counting treatment of the coin is identical to treatment of all other coins. There's no negative macroeconomic effects. It works just like additional tax revenue or borrowing under a higher debt limit. The law provides Treasury all necessary authority to pursue this course. This is from Philip Deal, who was once the director of the U.S. Mint. And he says, I know this because I wrote the law, produced the nation's first platinum coin. I've been through this entire process. How this would work is that the Treasury Secretary would direct the U.S. Mint to mint a coin, and it could be worth 5 cents. It could be worth $1 trillion. It's not how much platinum it's in it. And then that coin would be deposited in the U.S. government's account at the Federal Reserve, and it would use simple accounting methods. The U.S. ledger, Treasury ledger, the U.S. government's ledger would be plus a surplus of $1 trillion. Some people one person who was a critic of it actually said, well, if we do this, it will show the falsehood that money is, because that's a whole nother conversation about money and what it really is, because it's a whole concept, a mythical concept by itself. So as I get towards the end, I want to reiterate the quote from Theodore Roosevelt, that there can be no real political democracy unless there is something approaching economic democracy. And I bring up the quote again because his cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the president during the Great Depression, when he was president, the United States actually was an economic democracy. It was the closest thing ever. Well, not the closest thing, but it was. So the U.S. had it during the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And what he did was he wrested control of monetary policy away from Wall Street and enacted policies that allowed for shared prosperity for all. So imagine that, a U.S. president who stood up to the banks. They were not very happy, and they wanted to do everything they could to get rid of him. They opposed him when he ran for re-election in 1936, but Roosevelt's policies were so universally popular that he won in a landslide, even as the banks were doing their best to sink him. In his inaugural speech, when he became president in 1933, Roosevelt promised to expel the money changers from the political system, saying, they knew only the rules of self-seekers and had no vision. And when there is no vision, the people perish. So Roosevelt's policies were such, he knew what he needed to be done. He had the leaderships to encourage to do it. And he forced bankers to relinquish control of the monetary system. Imagine that. And in the process, for the first time in U.S. history, a true economic democracy was established. The austerity policies were over. The U.S. used public spending to institute the New Deal. The Green New Deal takes its name as an homage to the New Deal, Roosevelt's New Deal. Over FDR's presidency, government spending was close to 40% of GDP, an unheard of amount at that time. This is what allowed the economy to begin its recovery from the Great Depression. And this New Deal and the economic democracy continued even after Roosevelt died in 1945, continuing through subsequent presidencies of Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and I forgot Nixon. But even Richard Nixon, his successor Gerald Ford, and Jimmy Carter. And over those decades, prosperity was shared equally amongst all classes of people. It came to an end with Ronald Reagan's presidency when he ushered in the age of neoliberalism, of allowing corporations to dictate public policy, which led to privatization, slashing the social safety net, and reducing government regulations, also led to the degradation of the environment and increased pollution and carbon emissions. Jimmy Carter famously put solar panels on the White House. Ronald Reagan took them down. ExxonMobil scientists in the 1970s were telling ExxonMobil that continued extraction will lead to climate change, and they already were talking about the implications of climate change. But as Reagan came in, ExxonMobil felt empowered to just silence their scientists and fund climate change deniers. So then this is where we're at now. The age of neoliberalism is having a let up, but still privatization. And so all this stuff it's really new. It's not a new idea. It's just an idea as time has come. And as Victor Hugo famously said, there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And creating a sustained prosperity for all, a Green New Deal, a livable, sustainable environment, an economic system. It's an idea that's kind of come, but it's really just, it's an idea that's always been there. And it's really just the way we all want to live. So as I come to an end, again, most of these ideas and more come from my book, Toward a More Perfect Union, which is at this website, moreperfectunion.solutions. You go there, you could order the book or get connected to Amazon and buy the book there. And or you could find where I have a sign up if you want to sign up on my email list. I also have my web series, which I've created 13 short videos, very creative stuff, going over a lot of this stuff in story form. And one last little plug, if I can get here. In January, I'm going to be crowdfunding for a documentary film I'm going to be making next year called How to Save Democracy. And so the crowdfunding campaign has not launched. It will launch on January 16th. And if you go on my moreperfectunion.solutions website and sign up, you'll get emails when I launch it. But regardless, it's 2 minutes long, and not to be self-aggrandizing, just want to tell you about it. So it's just a short video about it.
We are on the way to becoming a two-tiered society, composed of a few winners and a larger group of Americans left behind, whose anger and whose disillusionment is easily manipulated.
This land is yours, this land is mine. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went walking that ribbon of highway, I saw a tree that in the skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me.
Well, then I talk at the end.
Hi, I'm Michael Wayne. I'm the person behind this upcoming documentary, How to Save Democracy. This is a crowdfunding page, and the perks are to the right on this page. Obviously, I'm looking for financial support, but even more important than that, I'm looking for this to become a collaborative project, because saving democracy is too big for any one person to do. Myself, making this film, we're all in this together. We all need to work together, to come together to make this the most important project, saving democracy in our lifetimes. So please join me, join us as we do this. Thank you so much.